I spent years trying my best to build a business by taking the shirt off my back and handing it to other people. And let's just say that 6 years later, I ended up in a psych ward next to the former executive of Lockheed Martin, okay, in suburban hospital, living in my mother's townhouse, divorced and broken, only to end up like 6 months later engaged to a man in Colorado who was like a Hare Krishna. And you can only imagine how that ended. So really what I wanted to get to today is like, what does it mean if we kind of have to sell out? I got this on repeat right now, guys. This is the mood for the episode. Kanye stand till I die. Jesse had to go to private school. Jesse dad's cool. Jesse had rules. Hey. Run the night all night. She party like all night. All right, I'm going to leave it there because that is definitely the theme for the episode this week. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Not Podcast. It's not a podcast, but it's not a podcast either. Grab your beverages. Let's sit down and hang out. My name is Daryl Oh, and I'm here to share stories and lessons my younger self desperately needed to hear and leave an archive for this future bag of bones to look back on and say, wow, girl, you really did that. So every other week, I take a topic, argue both sides, and then find a middle ground to live in the paradox of life, right? Because all truths are but half truths. So this week, we are diving into what it means to not be a sellout, to not be for sale, okay? And if you're coming over here from the newsletter, I tease a little bit about what we were going to deep dive on today, which is essentially what I have discovered is my version of selling in, right? Rather than selling out, what does it mean to sell in? So we're going to zoom out a little bit, talk about the history of what it means to be a sellout as an artist. I'm going to share some stories of what it was like for me to attempt to not be a sellout, and then share with you the ultimate lesson, which was despite my efforts, we live in a capitalist society and we have to pay to live. So unless you want to join the libertarians who are deluded to the fact that they're actually house cats, okay, and they're not as free as they think they are, and they rely on the entire infrastructure of this country and the globalized world in order to be able to get the things that they want, okay, we're going to actually step into reality, which means that we got to put our big girl panties on, thank you very much, and actually take responsibility for ourselves, right? Because what happens when we let this idea of being a sellout take over, we end up thinking that money is the root of all evil. And I'm just going to tag the ritual down in the bottom here, okay? And you need to deal with your money blocks, all right? And I'm not going to teach you how to do that because Mami Onami is the best example out there of being able to heal the money blocks, especially for this girl right here who thought for years that she was actually healing her money blocks when she was just in a perpetual state of fawn and freeze, just people pleasing left and right and getting congratulated for it, thinking that it's actually her success, okay? So if that sounds familiar to you at all, I want you to stick around for this entire episode. It's going to be juicy, and I think it's going to be a good time. So chapter 1, what does it mean to be a sellout? Okay, because back in the 1900s, it meant that you were a lame-o loser poser that had no authenticity and was just selling their soul for a corporate dollar, okay? That's like the grunge movement, essentially. Like, it wasn't cool to be like a pop star. It wasn't cool to basically make a lot of money and like try and gather attention, right? You guys have to remember, this is like pre-Instagram. This is pre-celebrities sharing every single aspect of their life, all right? So I, like everybody else born in the 1900s, really feel like money is the root of all evil, especially if you were an alt kid, And so that means that, the yuppies were ruining everything, like the 80s, professionals that were basically the boomers. And we all know how that turned out. And I'm not saying that we have to be money hungry, grubby little freaking capitalists. But what I am saying is that when I turned 18 years old, I had the very original dream of going to New York City after my parents had like a terrible divorce. mommy and daddy were paying my rent and tuition, so I wasn't as independent and as free as I thought I was. But I spent my nights working as a nightlight photographer back when you still could get paid to do that, okay? Instagram was around, but it wasn't necessarily something that had the quality that would allow you to shoot like a concert level photo of Beyonce from the stands with your 3x zoom iPhone 6. We're talking about our phones were in our pockets because we were too busy partying our asses off. And it was such a good time. I will definitely link the photos I took for Nikki Digital's platform at the basement parties of Webster Hall. There are some really amazing photos in there. I actually ended up turning some of those photos into my senior thesis at NYU for my photo and imaging degree, which is so hilarious that my family spent $250,000 for me to do that. But I'd be lying if I said that that was the culmination of my education. So much of what I am able to do now is steeped in my ability to have very high visual literacy. It's almost impossible for you to pull wool over my eyes because I basically have a bachelor's degree in propaganda. So I'm really grateful for my education, but let's not pretend that the silver spoon wasn't up my asshole. Okay, so my journey and my identity was built on trying to reject this reality, hide this reality. You know, like back in the 2010s, like right before the woke movement, you know, all of us would play Struggle Olympics and we'd try to pretend that even though we came from privilege, we didn't, you know? And so that's another topic for another day, but I just can't believe how much I spent my time thinking in those days that I was like running away from being a capitalist when I was engaging with it 100% and was just too young to know that like I was being a sellout, you know? So the night I graduated from NYU, I was unsurprisingly incommunicado with my father at that point, and my mom took me for a coffee near Radio City Music Hall, and like this medical leave that I took during the NYU days, like I think my freshman year, I took a medical leave for depression. And I was always like running away from that fear that I was going to have to take another break from college, you know? And so when I graduated, even though it was like clipping at me at my heels, right? My depression really was one step behind my like manic need to prove myself. So rather than dealing with it, okay, 21-year-old Daryl, I just kept running. So when I moved into my first apartment, which was this like tiny little 1-bedroom conversion that had 2 other roommates, okay? So this is on 2nd and 2nd Street in the Lower East Side of New York. I had this apartment that I could literally touch both sides. That's how wide my room was, because that 1 bedroom was split down the middle with a pressurized wall that was so thin. Every single time my roommate had sex, it was like we were having a threesome, okay? Like, and then the other girl was like somehow like wedged into some sort of like fake room in the hallway. Our entire apartment slanted, and if you like put a bottle of Coke at one end, it would roll all the way down to the other end of the apartment. I do not know how that place didn't explode from a gas leak, especially because most weekends I would find my roommate blackout drunk, like with a burnt bowl of pasta. One time that happened so badly that the fire department was called, and I came home to her half naked in the bedroom with a bunch of FDNY just like hotties like standing over her like a porno. It was, I mean, I do not know how I survived the 2000s, but here we are. So my roommate, not the one that was like blackout all the time, but the other one, she got me a job at this really amazing fashion startup that was female led, and backed by Y Combinator. And back in those days, it was very rare for a female-led business to get VC funding, let alone that being Y Combinator. Okay, that's the VC firm that started like Uber, just so you know. All right, so this was like a really big deal for me. This was like my first encounter with, you know, submitting to success and just like fully selling myself out, because I didn't want to continue to just live off mommy and daddy's dime. I had been completely confronted by that fact when I graduated and was just like really humbled by the reality of what it meant to like truly be on my own. So I took that job, a glorified position that was honestly mostly slave labor, okay? Because I was sold on the dream, like so many kids fresh out of college, with this like sweat equity promise that if they got bought out, I would be able to retire my parents that I was like estranged from at that that point, okay, on a measly $33,000 a year, like shitty healthcare. And I just thought that I had made it, I had finally made it. And even though I had become this sort of like startup corporate sellout, it made me feel like good about myself. Call me a Capricorn, call me what you want, but I really had convinced myself, since this was like a female-led business and like I was, a person of color and like I was queer, that it meant like, okay, it was all good. But like, again, just another effort like to pretend I wasn't selling out when I really was, and then thinking that it was empowering me while also thinking money is the root of all evil. Make that make sense, okay? But when the model turned founder, okay, and she was this gorgeous woman who like came to the US and, paid her way through like college as a math major while modeling as like a teenager, okay, it was something that I respected. But one day I was about to leave the office after like a 90-hour week, y'all, okay, no paid overtime. And my eyes were basically bleeding because I had just edited another 600 items of e-commerce that had to go onto the website by myself, okay, no help. She was trying to convince me that I wasn't allowed to leave because she was still at the office. And do you know what her brag was? She was like, my grandmother is dying in Russia. Okay, just for context, this grandmother had raised her in the USSR, and she told this story all the time about how like her neighbor was so starving that she ate her pet dog. Okay, so we're talking about a grandmother who literally sacrificed so much for this woman, Olga, to come to the United States and become the American dream. And she was bragging about how she was missing her grandmother's like dying process, basically. She was on her deathbed and she said, Daryl, I'm staying here and sticking to this dream because that's what this company is all about. And I looked at her and I was like, you're never going to catch me missing a life-altering moment where I will never have a chance to say goodbye to the person that raised me because I wanted to make this business happen. Enough was enough, So I quit on the spot, eloped in secret with my boyfriend at the time, and said I was gonna finally become a real artist, And so I moved out of that apartment and then moved into his apartment in Bushwick to the McKibben Lofts, like if you know, you know. And then I got a lease for like, I'm using air quotes here if you're listening on your headphones, a studio of my own. Mind you, it was literally just a urinal that had been demolished and had no heating and broken windows for a cash deal under the table for $750 a month. And the most that ever came out of that was like a very cringy selfie where I was like trying to be cute and look successful when I was really freezing my ass off and scared shitless that I had just basically put myself in a situation where I was reliant on my boyfriend to keep me afloat and I had no income coming in. And it was very humbling. It was like my first lesson of being like, I'm off the market. Like I am off the market officially and I've got to be responsible for myself, but I'm not going to sell out. Even though to be an artist is probably the most elitist capitalist thing you can do, because if you really want to make money as an artist, you have to be able to convince very wealthy people to buy your art as an investment for them to then donate to a nonprofit so that they can write off their millions of dollars. That's how the old school art world works, okay? So I'm still delulu thinking that I'm leaving, capitalism to be able to like be this bohemian artist when I was really just locking myself into another capitalist system that I thought that I was like getting the best of. Like, joke's on me though, because instead of confronting all of these issues I had been running away from, like the things about self-worth that had continued to make me just push and run and run. I mean, the moment that I went back to school after medical leave from having depression, like I don't think that I stopped working until like I was in a psych ward 10 years later from burnout. But that's a story for a different day. Really, the point that I'm trying to bring up is that I kept running. Okay. I kept running from the fact that I never felt good enough. I kept running from the fact that I needed to be able to be financially independent. I needed to be able to recognize that money was not the root of all evil. It was going to be the thing that was going to set me free. But I was in denial. So I went to my dad, came up with this whole business plan that I had started in a elective at my last year of college called the Business of Art, which is so ironic to pay $250,000 on a bachelor's degree from probably one of the most prestigious photography schools in the world, and they don't even consider the business of art as like a main piece of their curriculum. Like, that's also another long topic for another day. But really, I tried so hard to come up with a business model that was like going to do social good, that wasn't going to be for profit, that was going to honor the legacy of like sharing studio space in New York that allowed all these bohemian artists to live and flourish in Soho. But again, that's just a lie too, because all of those people were only able to get all of those lofts because they were, again, using a capitalist system and a loophole in, I think, real estate to be able to lease to own these apartments that ultimately just allowed Soho to be gentrified. There like are a handful of like old school boomer artists that still have these apartments that are worth millions, but they're paying like, I don't know, $750 a month. It's crazy. But ultimately, it came down to me really wanting to try and make a business for myself and for my community. And that culminated in me guilting my father into loaning me $25,000 to open up a commercial studio of my own and build an artist collective built off that legacy. And that was called Holy Rad Studio. I'll go ahead and link it in the description. I can't even access that Instagram anymore. But I spent years trying my best to build a business by taking the shirt off my back and handing it to other people. And let's just say that 6 years later, I ended up in a psych ward next to the former executive of Lockheed Martin, okay, in suburban hospital, living in my mother's townhouse, divorced and broken, only to end up like 6 months later engaged to a man in Colorado who was like a Hare Krishna. And you can only imagine how that ended. So really what I wanted to get to today is like, what does it mean if we kind of have to sell out? If you recognize that money is actually a sign that you're in alignment with yourself, you're in alignment with your highest purpose, you will be rewarded for living and doing good, right? Because if you serve, you deserve. We need to get off of our high horses and recognize that making money from doing good is not a bad thing. I cannot tell you how many people that I know that are doing services that are considered like, you know, helping people, like whether you're a therapist, a life coach, if you are helping children or people of need or animals, like you're not allowed to make money from that. And that could not be further from the truth in my experience and in my opinion. Okay. And this is not an original idea. Like it's a very ancient concept that like, is practiced in Hinduism, right? It's called the Purusharta, and I'm so sorry for the mispronunciation. I'm going to butcher it. But essentially, it's the idea of like 4 stages, okay? The first one is dharma, which is essentially stepping into righteousness and your moral values and serving from those moral values, right? And that's what I thought I was doing running a social enterprise in the form of a creative agency where we were providing affordable access to like space and equipment and resources for other struggling artists and up and coming artists like myself to be able to like share the cost of a space, you know, and like this isn't that much different from any other model in the sharing economy. And when it works, it really works well. But because I wasn't doing it from a place of my own moral value, I was doing it from this place of like wanting to prove that I was enough. It was never going to be something that was sustainable. So it was no surprise that I ultimately crashed and burned. But like now I'm able to actually do something that's in service of my values and is actually getting me paid. And I can't tell you how hard it was for me to be able to accept that, especially because that money was not coming from making art. But that's how I found my balance, is that I am officially able to say that my art is not for sale. And that was only something that I was able to really confront after doing the artist way, because the way that I want to make my living is not hinged upon the art that I make. The art that I make, I want to basically be this sacred space for me to explore myself, my identity, and share stories in a way where I can get grant money or be able to fund those projects because I have extra income coming in. For me, my dharmic purpose is to give voice to mute genius, right? To provide organizational systems to those who would otherwise, without them, not be able to, share their genius with the world in the way that it needs to, okay? So many of the ideas that I love are never going to get out there because y'all are not confronting the fact that you do need to master systems. You do need to know how a corporation works. You do need to be able to step into those rooms and be able to articulate yourself and be able to negotiate and fend for yourself and be able to make a living. Because if I had those tools, I would have been able to go to that Russian founder and say, hey, $33,000 is not enough for what you're asking for me. And looking back now, I know the only real reason she wanted me for that job was because I was too naive to recognize that she was undercutting my salary. Okay. So basically, when I was trying to avoid selling out, I was just being taken advantage of by other people who were using money for evil, who were trying to take advantage of other people. And that's on them and that's their values. I'm not going to judge that. I really hope that that woman is living her best life as a housewife now. But I think that we underestimate that God wants to reward us. Universe wants to reward us for service. And there's nothing wrong with making money from doing good. And so me being able to be more financially independent, doing something that maybe I thought wasn't going to be my life's purpose and maybe isn't as glamorous as being like a billionaire artist or whatever it is that I thought that I wanted. And I never really wanted that anyways. I think that that's the problem. I didn't even have a clarity of what I wanted. I just kept pursuing and running away from the fact that I didn't know who I was and I didn't have that self-worth and I didn't have that financial independence and I just wanted to prove myself. And that energy is beggar energy. That's pick me energy, and all that's going to get you is a crash and burn. So really, it's about scaling those moral values in a way that you can provide a service for people that's actually helpful to them. Do you think people have a problem with paying for something that actually improves their lives? You know what I'm saying? Like, if you had a cure for the one problem in a person's life, whether it's organizational, aesthetic, spiritual, medical, like anything, if that person is able to hand you money and their problem is solved, do you think they're going to feel bitter about you making some money off of that? No, they're going to be happy that instead of the people that are raping and pillaging this world and without any accountability, who take their money every day, like, your taxes, for one example. I love being able to spend money on people where I know that that money is going to allow them to do that thing more and better for more people. Come on, that's wonderful, So for me, I want to be able to bring in this concept of selling in, leaning into the fact that we are never going to get away from needing to provide a service. That's why you incarnated on this freaking planet to begin with, is to figure out your purpose, provide the service, be humble enough to be able to recognize that it's not even you getting rewarded. It's you essentially participating in a system where everybody is rewarded for your genius coming to the front. And if the reason for why that isn't happening is because you think the root of all evil is money, you are actually going to prevent yourself from being able to participate in the world's doing good. When it means to sell in, for me, means to recognize radical responsibility. All right? It's the opposite of being a victim. Because unfortunately, and this is going to, rub a couple people the wrong way, but it wasn't until I recognized that I got myself into the abusive relationship with that man I was engaged to in Colorado that allowed me to take back that responsibility and say, if I got myself in, I can get myself out. And I did. And that's what made me get here, standing on my own 2 feet, traveling the world full time with the man of my dreams, paying off my debt with confidence, and I just got hired by my dream client. So I want you guys to understand that this is something that's going to save you a lot of energy. It's going to save you a lot of energy. Stop fighting the good fight, thinking that you're going to dismantle the system when it's contingent upon us fighting so much that we're building an arch that holds up a bridge of people that do not participate in what you're participating in. So for me, I'm not telling you that you have to sell out with your art. I have a very, very staunch line in the sand that my art is not for sale, because when I do that, it turns me into an absolute mess and it makes my art shitty. That's why this podcast is not about getting followers. It's not about getting money. It's not about any of that. It's truly about me showing up and doing what I've actually said at the beginning of this podcast, which is leaving a quantum thread of information for my younger self to be able to have access to, because the present moment is connected to that, as well as the future moment. And every single time I show up on this podcast, I'm making an active choice to participate in a present moment, in a reality where I'm saying the things that I like, regardless of whether or not I'm going to get anything back. And when I started doing that, ironically, that's when I got the most paid. So you need to figure out what are the things that are going to make you feel wealthy in spirit when you actually do them, and let the universe show up for you in unique ways to be able to pay you to make that happen. So if you haven't already, please sign up for my newsletter. I've got some great resources in there. This fall, I will be opening up my books again to be able to provide Notion consulting services for you guys, as well as launching my very new version of my second heart system called The Office. And it is a virtual office space for you to be able to organize everything in your life, not just your work, your career, but also your health, your spirit, and keep you in alignment with your values. And that's something that I really feel like was missing for me in all of those younger versions of myself that was trying not to sell out so badly. I just didn't have a way to make sure that it was constantly working in my dharma. And you don't even have to use that language. You could say values, you could say, beliefs. It doesn't even have to be specific to you. If you have a religion that you practice, shit, if you're practicing like the Tao of the Wu-Tang, it doesn't even matter. You just need to be able to have a system that keeps you in alignment with your higher purpose so that you can be rewarded by executing on it, and then the universe can match that energy in the form of cash and capital and service and doors opening, And so what I'll do is just leave a link in the description for you guys to sign up for the waitlist for that. If you're on my newsletter, you'll automatically be added to that list as well. I'm just having so much fun now with this podcast. If you listen all the way through, like always, please leave a comment. I really, really want to meet the people that are willing to listen to this, because you're definitely my people and I want to be your friend, and just thank you for giving me your time and attention. But I'm going to close it out for the day and switch over to my favorite segment of the podcast called My Favorite Things. This week, I wanted to start with what I'm wearing, which is my boyfriend's college jersey. I really want to bring back basketball jerseys as dresses, okay? Cut to Mariah Carey singing the national anthem for the Wizards when Michael Jordan came back from retirement. That is an epic outfit, and I really wish that I could buy that actual dress, but I haven't found it on eBay. I think it was probably custom anyways. The next favorite thing I wanted to share is another fashion item, and that is my necklace, okay? But it's a little bit different than just sharing this necklace, because this is a one of a kind. I cannot tell you how many people stop me on the street and DM me and ask me where this comes from. It's made by a jewelry company called Otazu. He didn't make anything else like this, but the reason why I want to talk about this is not so much about this necklace specifically, but it's about the idea of having an iconographic uniform that you can wear every single day that people can recognize you for. Some people do this with their hair. Some people do this like Steve Jobs and literally wear the same Issey Miyake cashmere sweater and Levi slacks every single day. I love Steve Jobs. I don't care that he was an asshole. That man was a genius. And then next on the list, okay, is Spotify's smart playlists to be able to give you a specific BPM for running. Okay, so BPM specific playlists for running. I'm in my 30s, so obviously I'm getting into running. It's either running or pickleball or having a kid, and I'm not fucking having a kid anytime soon, so we're going with running. But I cannot tell you how much running became something that was accessible to me by having music that I could pace to. It's like the same concept as like the Marine two-step, where it's like left, 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 right, left. It's to like keep a pace, right? And I'm not doing that in my head over and over again because I actually like myself. So instead, I have Spotify, who has basically a decade of information of the music that I like, and I just set a specific BPM, and for a whole hour it on shuffle gives me new songs that are a specific rate, so I stay on beat. It's really, really been life-changing for me, because as long as I keep the pace of the song, I can sort of zone out, and next thing you know, I've like run 10K, and I've never run that long my entire life. So really big fan of that. So that's enough for my favorite things. Like, follow, subscribe. All the links are in the description below. Thank you guys so much for sticking around. I have so much fun doing this. I will see you this time in 2 weeks on another topic where we get to discuss both sides and find a healthy middle. See you then.